Hello everyone and welcome to my studio here. I guess I can start with this camera where I'm looking straight at you. Here we go. It's a little weird, but here I am in rainy London. It's raining pretty hard outside through those windows, just starting to get dark. This is kind of exciting. I haven't really done something like this before, but a lot of people joined, so that's really exciting. And I think what we're going to do, because there are probably people who've registered who are just coming in, we'll start by just playing the track Sporre, which I'm going to focus on, and then I'll do the full sort of introduction, walk around the studio a little, then we'll dive into the track piece by piece and talk about it. And as far as questions go, you can try and put some questions in the chat while we're going, but I'm going to have a dedicated Q&A at the end. If there's something that you're really dying to find out about during the talk, then you can try it. I'll try and pay attention to that, but we will have a dedicated Q&A. Okay, let's just give you a little tour of the studio here. Not much to see, to be honest, but it could be fun. I'm going to take this camera and move it around. Holy Mountain poster. That's a geometric artwork from, I think, sort of the early 20th century. The synthesizers. This is called a lyra. It's kind of a noisy feedback machine. This is a Buchla easel, which is my favorite little synth. And this one, an MFB synth, which I don't use that much. I also have one called the Deckard's Dream, which is downstairs connected to a big keyboard because it's sort of meant to be played with big lush sounds. Books, lots of books. That poster is from a show in 1998 in San Francisco that I played with Kit Clayton and some bands, free jazz band. There were a lot of amazing shows in the late 90s in San Francisco that had really interesting mixes of artists. More books back there. You can see me in the mirror. More books. That's a poster from a great festival in France, feminist festival that happened some 5-6 years ago. Happy plant with vines growing down that actually went across the room, and I had to twirl them around to rein them in. Okay, I'm going to put that back there. So let's start by listening to Sporre, and I guess I'll kind of just, I'll scroll sort of through the arrangement of it while it's playing so you can take a look at some of the automation, and then we'll talk about it in more detail once it's played through. back to this. So yeah, as someone mentioned, this is a very simple session and arrangement. When I thought of doing this presentation, I kind of got rid of the extra stuff. When I was brainstorming, I left a lot of loose ends around in the session, which I kind of tidied up and organized it a little bit better. But at the root of it, it's a pretty simple track. So there's a little story behind it. So this track, I actually started it several years ago, I guess. I think it was in 2020 that I started it. Actually, I think that the kind of spectral layer that forms the basis of the track may have been recorded even earlier. But I kind of put it together as a track first in 2020. And the way these kinds of a lot of my tracks start with me just taking a synthesizer and maybe running it through an effect or not, and just spending a chunk of time trying to get somewhere with it. Just get into one space and then try all the subtle permutations of a kind of narrow space. It basically was a long recording session where I was running that Buchla easel through this set of spectral effects, which I'll show you in a second. But originally I just had this kind of spectral drone layer and only a kick drum. And I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of trying to make tracks that just kind of have a beat and one sound. And I try and really hold back from like adding more until it's really necessary. So I actually had a version of this track that was just a kick drum and that sort of growing, noisy, spectral drone layer. And I was asked to do this exhibition in Milan of some of my video and photography that was going to it was going to be installed with some musical element. And it's related to a shoe company called Marcel, a small shoe company that makes handmade shoes. And they wanted to release a kind of limited edition something, music piece to go with the exhibition. So they actually asked me for an unreleased track, and I gave them this track, which is just the kick drum and the spectral layer, and they pressed a one-sided 12-inch, which I think there's maybe 100 or 200 of them, and they gave them to some people I don't know. They sent me like 20 of them, and they put them in a leather sleeve, which turns out is not very practical, but because they make really nice leather shoes, they tried this idea of leather sleeve. But I should switch to this camera, shouldn't I? Good idea. Full camera. That's better. So you can see it's like a lathe cut, clear, one-sided vinyl, and it was called Sporre at that time. And this is really, I'd say, an unfinished track, and the quality is a little bit low, but it's a nice-looking piece of plastic, I guess. Maybe they'll be worth millions of dollars someday. That's a postcard from the exhibition. So that's where this track first appeared in its early form. And then over the last few years, I added bit by bit. I thought, oh, maybe this needs one little sound, one more sound. And I didn't add too many sounds, but eventually it became something. At one point, it got a little too full, and I pulled the sounds back. I spent a lot of time playing it for other people too, and getting feedback about what that right balance should be. So let me go through the elements of the track. We'll go back to the Ableton view here. And so what we have here is this sort of group of spectral sounds. There's just 3 of them. And an 808, just a basic kind of standard 808 drum kit that's built into Ableton. The bass drum is completely unprocessed. If I show you the kick drum here, I'm not even using this built-in compressor or Dr. Bus thing that adds some color. I just EQing it a little bit with this built-in EQ, and I think that I didn't even end up using this filter, but it's really just a dry 808 kick drum. There's one closed hi-hat and one snare drum. And then there are 3 bass sounds. This one, pure sub, is really just sub bass that gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of weight in the track. So, you know, I don't find you need to use any kind of special synth for that. Anything that kind of creates a sine tone in this 40 to 50 hertz range is good enough for that kind of thing. We'll listen to these all in a second. There's a kind of a 303 acid bass sound, which comes from this wavetable synth. And then the one that I froze, which I probably didn't need to freeze, is a kind of single bass note. So those 3 tracks with bass sounds, each are just playing one note. Maybe one of them has 2 notes. That's one note, one measure, 2 notes in a single measure, and one note. 3 drum sounds, and then these spectral drones. So that's the whole thing. So you can see with the droning section of it, here I saved the session, which is like a 30-minute recording session, where I sent the Buchla through these plugins, which if anyone is interested in spectral sound, these are really great, and this composer from New Zealand created them and gives them away for free. So they have this really basic interface, just sliders and things like this. And there's a dozen of them or so, and you can go to his website and download them for free. And, you know, to be honest, like I've studied a bit of spectral music and I understand it to some extent, but when it comes to programming and software and technical stuff, I'm not that great. So I don't really understand how these plugins work, to be honest, but you just kind of load them up, you see the parameters, try out the combinations, and you can find really beautiful textures that emerge from that. It's really just sort of getting familiar with, for me, the important thing is how does the sound kind of feel? So when I find something that makes me feel a certain way, usually uneasy or confused in an interesting way, then I try and stay in that area a little bit. So let's go through and see what I did in the arrangement here. So the first spectral sound we hear, let's see if we can actually hear some sound without a glitch. So that's the first layer, and we're hearing the beginning of that 30-minute recording, which you can see I zoomed out of here. Oops. And what happens is we hear it play until it gets to the sort of 13th bar, and then it just starts looping that one bar. For the rest of the track, you just hear that one bar loop, and I'm just modulating it. What I've got processing it is just a couple of filters. I tend to load up with filters, high, low pass, and notch filters, and shape sounds with EQ, and then automate that stuff to really create a shape. So just with filters and EQ, you can actually achieve a lot of other effects with extreme uses of EQ. In fact, that seems to be what actually happens behind the scenes in a lot of effects. So I often try and limit myself to some basic effects and see if I can achieve some more complicated result out of this combination of simple things. So what's happening here in a lot of these droning bits is the sound is getting compressed by the kick drum and by one of the bass sounds in some cases. This is called a sidechain compressor, which is a pretty common effect where if something else plays, like the bass drum, then the level of this will drop. So you get a kind of a sucking in and out rhythm. I play with that a lot in my tracks, and it's a nice way to create interplay and create space, because then you don't need the drone to be there gobbling up the space all the time. It can be sucking out and making space for other things. So that's breathing with the kick drum pattern. The low pass filter is kind of going up and down every 8 bars, and then there's a notch filter kind of just meandering through it. The sound by itself, this is so you can see it's just this kind of full wall of sound, which these spectral processes tend to create this big field of harmonics that's kind of similar to what a gong does. And I'm drawn to those kinds of bell gong-like sounds with lots of frequencies. And then you can, within that dense sound, you can really carve into it and find spaces. So the second track creeps in. It's very high sound that just sort of creeps in these little breaks and then creeps in the second half. I have these few very carefully placed breaks of the kick drum. So when the kick drum goes away, the compressor stops working and then everything gets really loud. But then as soon as it comes back, it sucks back in. So I'm playing with that and letting this high sound creep in. It's very subtle as it comes in. So you can hear how that sounds with everything. And that one is just also a tiny loop of less than a bar, just a tiny loop. And then there was another long recording that I made using those spectral plugins that, in this case, I play it from here, and then it ends up just looping 4 bars for the rest of the track. So after it kind of comes in, and then it just loops 4 bars for the rest. So for the majority of the track, you're just hearing these short loops, and they're being modulated by shaping the EQ and filters. So the really high one has a frequency shifter on it and just an EQ, and it's also being played, sucking in and out with that compression. And then the third one actually creates a kind of rhythmic effect with these 3 notch filters. Actually, there's 5, because there's this other one that is more of an analog modeling one that's kind of scrolling through. And I'll play this track and also so you can hear what it sounds like without the processing. So this is a kind of a lower spectral layer. You can hear it kind of locks in with the rhythm. Better. No, the ending you can hear better. And here it works with the rhythm. Now, if I take off these filters, you don't get that rhythmic effect. You just hear this big drone. Take off the compressor. The loop point is even not very clean. If you don't have these other things running, it's kind of jarring to hear the loop point. But with these filters, one of them is sort of going every 8th note back and forth, cutting out this frequency like this, and one is going every half note and 1 3/4. So together they make a kind of a rhythm. So that's those I guess you could say. That's really the base of the track. These three droning layers. I built everything around that. But what I built around that was just a couple drum sounds and a couple of bass sounds, and then kind of figuring out how to arrange it so that it feels like it's growing organically and opening up spaces for you to hear details, and somehow creating a level of tension and energy that stays there throughout the track without getting too dense and painful on the ear. I wanted to just play you what the some stuff from the long 30-minute jam that so this is the original session that's low. There's actually, I kind of forgot this was such a long session, and when I was practicing, kind of going through this stuff, listening to this, there's actually a lot of nice material in here. I could probably make a few more tracks out of this, but I'd forgotten that there was this long 30-minute session behind this. So there's some low and high stuff, kind of stopping and starting. And then another nice thing is sometimes I'll kind of do one of these sessions where I've processed something and then try and process it again with the same plugin and see what happens. So if I put that same plugin on it, it does some cool stuff. Sometimes it actually becomes less interesting. At a certain point, it becomes less interesting if you reprocess, but it's nice to play with that, kind of doing the same thing over and over again and to the same sound. And sometimes you kind of spin into this chaotic state and find something new from that. This is from the lower layer. That's some high bits. Yeah. So that's the spectral stuff. But as you can see, what you actually hear in the track is just this teeny little bit of that long recording. So then I added the drums. The kick drum stays pretty much the same pattern throughout, but I kind of have these carefully planned little breaks where things breathe. And then the hi-hat and snare drum that I add, what I tried to do, and this is another thing I do often, is see if I can just add one hit of a drum, for example, and send it through some effects that bounce back and create a rhythm. So I'm not actually necessarily programming the rhythm on a grid and then happy with that. I'm having everything go through these effects chains that are central to the rhythmic feel as well. And so I'm listening to that. So when the hi-hat comes in, it's just one hi-hat, but it comes back through some effects and creates a rhythm. Let's see where it comes in. So you can see in the arrangement here, there's that hi-hat, that one dot. We have the kick drum pattern, and that one hi-hat just comes in every couple measures, plays once. And it is going to this kind of doubler effect that makes it sound a little bit metallic. If I take that off, it's more simple. So it first goes through this kind of metallic doubling, flanging type thing, and then it goes through. I only have these 3 effects channels here. This is the main one that's kind of creating the rhythms. It's a delay, an erosion plugin, which basically kind of gives the sound a sheen of noise, which is really great for making any kind of sound into like a percussion sound. Again, another notch filter and some EQing. And that effect is then branching out into these other 2, which is just a simple, this is an office reverb, which kind of sounds like things are bouncing around a box a little bit. Pretty subtle. And this is a delayed reverb that's being compressed. That's adding a little bit to the sucking thing, but pretty subtle. But I'm actually being kind of lazy in that I'm sending the whole 808 kit through this effect instead of just doing it individually with the hi-hat or the snare drum. But the kick drum does a nice thing too, because I've EQ'd it in such a way that the kick drum goes through this effect and becomes part of the rhythm as well. So when you hear it all together, it's kind of giving a nice feel. Here comes the snare drum. See, that was just one snare drum and that little yellow bit there. And then I start to bring them in slowly. So it happens again, one snare drum, just one hit in that little break. But they start to creep in a little bit more. And I spent hours and hours just finding the right placement for those and the right spread of them, so they happen just enough times, not too many, not too few, and I second guess myself a lot. Keep going back, oh no, it's perfect, go back, nope, it's not perfect, nope, it's terrible. And then someone else usually has to tell me that it's good, so I stop messing with it. For someone who asked if this will be available later, yes, and we will edit out the glitchy beginning, so it'll be a little easier to watch. So then the 3 bass sounds, they're just Ableton synths, nothing special, but, and like I said, just one note. Basically, I'm trying to put them into this 1 or 2 measure area and just get this nice rhythmic skeleton that it becomes a space that you feel like you can exist in for a long time. That rhythm that can keep you for 4 or 5 minutes and not feel boring, just kind of carry you and carry the tension. This is a pretty typical kind of sound you'll hear from me or Function or people like that. It's just one note. And I didn't do that much modulation of this one. That one's frozen, I'll just leave it for now. And that's mostly what you hear, some subtle modulation. There's more modulation of this one. And this was the sound that I never completely loved. And another friend of mine said, this is the one sound that you really hear that sounds kind of normal and recognizable amongst the very alien spectral textures. And I kind of agree, but when I tried to take it out, it felt too empty. So I kind of played with having it there more or less and tried to find the right balance where for the first half of the track you don't really hear it, and these bass sounds they kind of creep in, so I also like to do that a lot, where sounds will kind of creep in so that you don't really realize they're coming in until they're already there. I like that feeling. It gets a little more modulated here, but I'm trying to keep it all within a cohesive texture. Seems to be behaving pretty well now. Thank goodness. And then the last one is just this. You can, if you have headphones, you might be able to hear. This is just a sub bass at 55 hertz or so, and it's really just giving you it's just helping you, helping the rhythmic feel. It's not something you really hear so clearly in the track, but it really makes a difference in how the track feels, especially on a big sound system. So that's something I do a lot. But you can see there isn't really much fancy processing or really, mixing, mastering stuff on these. It's pretty simple overall. I think when I made music in the 90s, I tended to go for like the 30 or 40 track arrangements and really just pile it on. But since I started the ROS project, I really try and pare it down to essentials, and then, find the chaos and excitement in those few elements that I'm working with, rather than just have the chaos on the outside that I'm trying to tame. I think this way works a little bit better. I think that covers the whole track of Sporre, and we can actually go to some questions. Yeah, this is a little disconcerting doing it just with a chat. I wish we could actually all be in the same room together and talk. Would be a lot better, but we'll make do. So I've got a question already. Did you do anything specific to get the 55 hertz sub bass to fit in the mix with the bass drum? No, I'm not very good at doing those. Sometimes I try and futz around with that. I mean, I might, if it really feels muddy, try and just cut out a frequency if I know that's 55 hertz and I don't want it to interfere. But in this case, it seemed like it was working just fine and not interfering. And when it comes to tuning, it's also very intuitive for me. I do look at a lot of the spectrum analyzers and try and see what frequencies are important by looking at those things. But then at the end of the day, I have to just tweak things around. If it doesn't sound right, it's a matter of listening to what one sound is like in conjunction with another, and also how they're interacting. So sometimes the interaction when things interfere is actually interesting. And sometimes it's just making things muddy. It's not always easy to tell the difference. Okay, a few more questions have come up. I can... how do I balance creative outlets of visual art forms and music? Well, I don't have much of a visual arts career, I would say. That exhibition was the only one I've done so far, and I would love to do more. So I'm really music focused, but I generally design my own album covers and my website and do this kind of thing. I've been doing sort of amateur self-taught graphic design for many years, and I love taking photographs, so it's just a matter of something I love to do, and I spend time doing it. Oh, and am I tempted to bridge between them? So I think I answered that. Yes, I tend to use the visual stuff that I do in my music somehow, like designs, Instagram posts, this kind of thing. Do you ever record automation with a controller or just draw it in? I used to do more try to record things, but I just got into graphs, and I like looking at these arrangements and being able to sort of zoom in and out to see the whole thing, to get in on a narrow area. And I just, I usually start by automating things with LFOs and getting them running. And then at a certain point, I tend to turn off a lot of LFO, unless it's a rhythmic LFO that's creating a rhythm. If it's sort of a slower thing, I usually eventually turn it off and then go in and draw the curve instead. And then I feel like it's, when I have this on a bigger monitor, I have a bunch of tracks of automation. I can see how they're all working together, and just tweak these graphs. I do kind of like drawing them, I have to say. Can I say something about how I prepare the track for a live performance? Well, yeah, my live performances consist of bouncing down these tracks into between, say, 4 and 8 stems. So I group the sounds in 4 to 8 tracks. And what I do is I have all of my tracks sort of in these broken down sections. Then I can make an arrangement of them. And to be honest, I've gone back and forth with trying to sort of combine them on the fly, and I've found I'm most happy if I actually create the arrangement of the tracks with the stems before the show, and then I can really hone in on sort of carving away areas, making things denser or less dense, really focusing on playing the effects and filters and things like that. And I just don't really mess with the arrangement. So I have an arrangement of all of these audio files that are separate sounds from tracks. Sometimes I end up with tracks that are made of bits of different tracks together, but the arrangement is pretty set. And then but I can actually really carve. I can take it down to one sound or add all the sounds and this kind of thing. So there's a lot I can do. And I'm often changing the arrangement, like in the hotel room or in the plane right before, and constantly incorporating new stuff. Where are we? Hope we can get to all these questions now that we're close to 9. Oh my goodness, it's scrolling like crazy. Okay, hold your questions for a second so I can get back up to where we were at. More. Every time you post a question, I have to scroll back up to where I was. Let me make this longer. How do you know your tracks are working on big systems? I'm just lucky enough to be able to try them. So if I have a new thing, I bring it into my live set as soon as I can, even when it's not done, and try and hear it. I can't always do that. There are tracks, if I don't have some gigs for a while and I might be working on something, I might just have to guess. And that is hard because I learn a lot by hearing things on sound systems. And I will change my mind about things once I hear it on a sound system. It's also different on different sound systems. And sometimes it's really great to have a track that sounds completely different on different sound systems. And sometimes there's this idea that you should make a track that sounds just right and the same on your MacBook speakers and sound systems so you can hear everything. But actually, my tracks often sound really different on different sound systems, and I kind of think that's okay. The problem is when you listen on certain, these are the kinds of tracks that when you listen on like laptop speakers, you won't necessarily hear all the frequencies, and that's okay with me. But I'm okay with the variation. Is there anything on your master channel? Oh, no. I just boosted the gain a little bit because everything was a little low. I didn't have the EQ on, so I didn't do any, sometimes I do have some stuff on the master channel if I want to tweak the whole mix, but, if it's not necessary, I don't do it. Any future multi-channel pieces? Yeah, I've done some multi-channel performances recently that were a lot of fun using ambisonics, and I did something with the 4D sound system in Berlin. I have this ambisonic piece that I performed, and I want to do something with it, and I want to perform it more. If anyone knows of venues that can do ambisonics, please invite me. I'd love to do more and figure out a way to release that stuff. How do you play it live? I think I answered that. Do you think of the club context when making a track, especially nowadays with fast BPMs? Yeah. I mean, I'm influenced by what people are doing to some extent, but I also potentially rebel against it, knowing what's going on. It's, I think, yeah, I do think of the context. I mean, I think when I'm making a track, I'm trying to think of multiple contexts, and I'm trying to imagine myself as a listener in all those different environments when I'm kind of in the headphones. Like, what would this be like if I was in a club? What would this be like if I was in a car? And I kind of imagine, what would this be like if I'm lying down and just lie down and listen? So I like to get those impressions, but then I can make my decision about how I want to engage with the trend, if at all. How do you reference your mixes? Do you do it all in the studio? Have you got a reference routine? I sometimes play the tracks on other speakers in the house, in the living room and kitchen and stuff like that, to hear how it sounds on different speakers. I go back and forth between headphones and speakers a lot, and then yeah, play it on the MacBook speakers just to hear the difference. And I also compare my tracks to other people's tracks. I think that's really useful. There's so many different ways to kind of produce, and the way a kind of really big, compressed, perfect sounding techno track, recently produced track sounds versus, say, an old Detroit track, or an 80s like Chicago track. It's nice to compare those. So I'm often just scrolling through things and hearing, just to kind of give my ears a change, and to be able to compare it to something. Because I do find if I'm working on a track and I don't do that, I might think it sounds really great if I haven't compared it to anything else, and then I realize that the balance is just completely out of whack. How do you go about designing the spatial aspects of a track? The spatial aspects, well, in this case, I guess if that means sort of the stereo field. I mean, there's the frequency field and the stereo field. I don't know if there's a specific answer to that, but I guess I tend to think of it as kind of a sculpture, and try and hear where things are in this vertical and horizontal space, and in the depth space, how far away, how close. When I use, I mean, a lot of times people get a spatial feeling by adding a bunch of reverb, and that's what I try and avoid. So when I use reverb, I do it very carefully. I want it to make something sit in a space in a certain way. I often process the reverb. I don't like blankets of reverb on things. I think they just sound like blankets of reverb effects, and so many people do that. And when I hear sounds that are just reverberating through reverb effects, it's not interesting to me. It just turns into a kind of a similar soup. So I want the spatial aspect of the track to sound mysterious, I guess, in some way. Like you're in a mysterious space, not a reverberant, familiar space. Do you recommend a book or resource about psychoacoustics? I don't have a recommendation. I would say a lot of my knowledge in psychoacoustics comes from listening to music that does interesting things with psychoacoustics, more than the theoretical side of it. So I think there's a composer named Gerard Grisey who actually wrote, I think he wrote a lot of stuff about his music as well, and there's some writings about his music. There's some pieces of his that if you were to email me about, I could tell you. I think that had a big impact on me. So some of the spectral composers that use acoustic instruments to create these spectral compositions are very fascinating to me. But I'm nowhere near that level of being able to kind of compose with instruments and use that technical skill on that level. And those pieces tend to be composed with a lot of technical backing behind them. Next. Can I go more into my arrangement mindset and building out of the loop? Well, I think what I said before was I often start with this kind of one bass. That is kind of the most important thing. So I think in my press release, I talk about like these interrelated effects processes so that one thing changes the other things. And I realized that sounded almost like I was doing some kind of intense algorithmic processing where I'm programming all these things to happen, but it's way more intuitive than that. I'm really trying to get it to feel like that more than anything. So I want, it's I think the arrangement mindset, it just comes from a lot of practice and a lot of listening over the years to decide what is a good arrangement. And I still second guess myself a lot. But, every track has its own elements that kind of have their own rules and their own language. And so, of course, there's the language of everything that's come before that you have to keep in mind. So it's a matter of that balance between doing the thing that you're supposed to do that's predictable and doing the thing that is unpredictable. If you make it too unpredictable, it becomes chaotic and loses attention, or it becomes something entirely different. But I try and stay in that very delicate area of things that feel like they're supposed to happen and things that might be surprising. And I don't know if there's a way to codify that so much, but some tracks feel like they need long spaces and breaks, and some kind of can exist just with drums going all the way throughout and the same layers throughout. And it really depends on what those elements are and how they feel. And it's a lot of listening to it over and over. Do you always start tracks by recording hardware performances to audio? No. It can be a soft synth as well. So there's a company called Madrona Labs, which is just one friend of mine in Seattle, old friend named Randy Jones, who makes incredible synthesizers. And I used his synths on a lot of tracks too. I've talked about them before. And so sometimes it's just sitting in Ableton with a synth and making long sessions as well. Do I consider myself a perfectionist? How do I decide when a track is finished and doesn't need more tweaks? I think I've also alluded to that a little bit. It's very difficult, I think, for most people. There are occasionally times when I feel like I'm led to the finish line in a clear way. It's very rare. But sometimes when that happens and I go back a few days later and listen, and I was totally wrong. It's not done. So, I mean, I'm a perfectionist about some things, but not all. So I guess as far as how I approach the kind of mixing and mastering, I don't do it in the perfectionist sense of learning proper engineering. My ear is trained just from years and years of listening, playing on sound systems and this kind of thing. But, I don't necessarily want to do the thing that just sounds good on the sound system. I want it to sound weird, but not muddy and painful. And it's not the same approach every time, but yeah. Where are we here? Oh, you want me to switch to the cam? Okay, you want to see my face big? There I am. Sorry that took so long. Is the order in which you play the tracks in your live set? Meaning, do you decide up front the set list order? Yes, so as I was mentioning, I actually decide before the set the sort of length and arrangement of the set. But within that big, messy arrangement, I can pull things out, add things in, really sculpt things. Would I be willing to show the illuminating glass project? I think time-wise that's going to be not possible because I haven't really prepared it and I don't know what it looks like. Maybe we'll see. Are we at the end of the chat? Maybe I could try and look for it, but what was it originally called? I could try and find it. Recommendation for the Alvin Lucier book, I would agree. And do I usually stick to stock Ableton plugins? Well, yeah, as you see, I use a lot of the filters and delays from Ableton. I think their effects have gotten really good over the years too. I use a few others. Like I was saying, I really like the Madrona Labs synths. And also, I like the Sound Toys filters and effects, which I use a lot. And I have the Waves plugins because they got really cheap at a certain point, and some of them are nice, but I don't use them that often. So I end up, even though this, for example, the Sound Toys filters are better sounding than the Ableton ones, the Ableton ones are so well integrated that I find I usually just go to those for most things. I read in an interview that you studied classical composition. Does this influence your electronic musical practice in any way? Yes, but it's hard to say exactly how. I do spend a lot of time engaging with piano music and classical music. And I think just seeing how composers like Bach approach their music and spending the time picking it apart, it just affects my mindset, but I have not yet been able to directly incorporate those ideas into the music I make. It might happen one day. But I think understanding the kind of grand scope of classical composition, the architecture of it is very inspiring to me. How do you use Filter Shaper? Any tips for using this tool? Filter Shaper. I don't think I had that. I don't think that was in my session. I don't think I know what Filter Shaper is, unless I'm using it and didn't realize it. The illuminating glass session, so the problem often happens that when I name a track for an album, then it's different from what the original thing was, and then it's really hard to find it sometimes. I probably should have prepared all those things in case we had questions like this, but let's see. I don't think I'll be able to find it, to be honest, quickly. And we are almost at 9:15 here. Wait, I might be able to find it. Oh no, I don't think I'm going to be able to find it in time. That would be for another session, maybe. Filter Freak. Filter Freak is the Sound Toys plugin. That's this pretty simple filter that you can automate. It's pretty standard, different filter types, and then you can make it move rhythmically. That's pretty much. There's no special tips I have for using it. It's just how you want to carve out the frequencies of your sound there. Do I use Max for live devices? Sometimes do. I actually studied Max before it was Max. Well, it was Max MSP and then went back to Max. I studied the first version of Max when I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley in 1992. And I've never been very good at programming, so I took this computer music class and learned Max programming, but I didn't get very good at it. I ended up becoming great friends with Joshua Kit Clayton, who's now the CTO of Cycling 74 that makes it, and he's a genius with this stuff. But I relied on a lot of friends who were good programmers and used their stuff and picked it apart. But I do like the Max for Live devices, definitely. I try not to, I mean, there are millions of them now, or probably thousands at least. And so I tend to, if I say, oh, I'm going to check out some new devices, usually the first thing I check out, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then I kind of stop there. So I don't end up exploring that many new things because there's just too many out there. So yeah, again, I'm trying to keep the scope a little bit limited. Will Arrose ever meet Sutek on a track? Well, it's probably already happened. Not officially, but I do hear the connection sometimes. I don't think I'll ever make it official, though. How would you describe your mixing process when finalizing tracks? Your mixes are always so robust, but spacious, soft, and natural sounding. That's very nice of you. Yeah, again, I think I don't have too much to say there. It's really an intuitive process where I just listen on lots of speakers and try and hear how the different sounds are interacting and decide if I want them to rub up against each other. Do I want them to be separate? These kinds of things. But I don't have special mixing, mastering plugins I recommend. You know, I just use kind of simple EQs and things like that. Someone said they hope that I'll do more of these with some of the other tracks. Maybe, yeah, this went really quite well as far as the number of people who wanted to participate. So maybe I'll try and do another session. I think once we're at over an hour, it's kind of loading up another track and going through would test patience. But having some space and maybe doing another session would be a good idea. I read you mention Athens Eon Wall of Sound as best sound system. What did you like there? Any recommendations for a future venue? Yeah, so the Wall of Sound is something that DVS1, the DJ DVS1 created with a team of people, and he is just a freak about sound systems. And I mean, I keep saying this, I don't really have strong technical knowledge about sound systems, but I know when a sound system sounds really good. And for me, it's about having that power that doesn't hurt your ears, but you can feel in your whole body. And they set up a sound system that has so many speakers that the sound is so balanced, but in this huge space. So I just never heard a sound system set up in such a huge warehouse that sounded so clear, and when you walked around it was even and it filled your body wherever you were. So you know, it was, as far as a warehouse sound system, it was absolutely the best I've experienced. And that's because there's also a team of people who are really dedicated to spending all day, and I guess even beforehand, setting it up, tweaking it, just getting it to sound right in the space. If you plan to do another session, request Waterfall. That one's really old, and I don't know if I can even load the session because it was done so long ago, but it's possible. It's not as interesting to go through, actually, because it's just this one little synth sound from the Razor synth that's looping. Again, it's like a little loop, and I just built drums around it for the most part. Yes, someone said, I don't think we're finding that project. It probably does exist somewhere, but it might be less enlightening than you think. Do you ever lose confidence in what you do, and how do you get over that hump? Ever have imposter syndrome? Sure, yeah. I mean, sometimes these things just seem all really pointless, and that's totally natural. How do I get over the hump? I mean, I think I just have gotten pretty good at letting go of thoughts like that over the years. I definitely went through periods of time where I was not good at letting go of those thoughts. But, I just realized that it's natural to have doubts, to doubt yourself, and I just let myself go through those cycles. I want to buy a buchla because I love the sounds. Virtual buchla, are they different? I have not used the Arturia buchla, but as I was mentioning, Madrona Labs, which is Randy Jones in Seattle, he made a synth called Alto, Aalto, which is modeled on the buchla, and I think that's a great thing to use if you don't have the money for an actual buchla. I would recommend that. It's $100, and the sound is really great. And it's kind of arranged in a similar way, this similar kind of oscillator to the buchla. It's inspired directly from that. Someone is requesting an 8-hour hymn to moisture session. No way. But maybe we'll do another session. It seems like people did enjoy this. Which devices do you use for your live performances? My live set, I have this little MacBook Air. I have a iPad that I use to sort of trigger things and control the laptop with so that I don't really have to look into the laptop screen. And then I use a controller that's just got lots of knobs and buttons that are controlling mainly filters and effects on all the different tracks. Any plans to release Helicopter Mass? That was the ambisonic piece I did, and yeah, I want to do something with it, but no concrete plans yet. Do I use a MIDI keyboard or just draw in notes? Yeah, good question. I have this teeny little thing here at my desk, but and I do use it for some things. I practice and play piano a lot, but I have a big digital piano downstairs, which I sometimes, like I have it connected to this Deckard Stream synth, and sometimes I'll bring the laptop down there. So if I want to do something really with notes, I'm going to use that keyboard if it's really note heavy. But as you can see, I often just have one note or two notes in those patterns, and a lot of times I'll use synths where it's not even the alto synth, for example, you don't even need a note, you can just turn up an oscillator, and I love that, where you can just tune an oscillator instead of play a note. So that's often how I get the sounds as well. It would be more enlightening to see how a track is made from one sound or loop, like a tree growing out of a seed. Yeah, well, I think I've not really made it. I mean, there are actually a couple of tracks on the album which are, you could say, sort of one sound or one synth. The last track is that buchla, just me playing that buchla through some delays and then layering it with itself a bit. And there's one track which is one of the Madrona Lab synths, I think called Verta, just layers of that one synth. So yeah, in another session I could show one of those tracks and how I just made something only with one synth. But if it's going to be a dance track, then, well, it kind of needs some drums. So it needs at least a couple of things. What app on the iPad? It's called Touchable, and it's not supported anymore. And so it probably won't be usable at some point. Touchable. It's just it just allows me to see the clips and the levels in Ableton pretty much. Do you have conceptual ideas before starting a track, or is it pure intuitive process? It tends to be more intuitive. Like I said, I tend to start with an exploratory phase with a synthesizer or something, with a sound or a synthesizer. And then when I find some area that draws me in, I try and focus in on it. Then I'll end up with these recordings, and then within those recorded sessions, find a spot that I can use. Sometimes it's just a teeny loop. Sometimes I use a longer session as well. But yeah, it usually starts with an instrument or a sound that I'm experimenting with. and sometimes it's just drums. So there's some tracks where, well, maybe I'm just going to have a bass drum. I've done several tracks where I just start with a bass drum, and what can I do with this bass drum? So it can be that as well. And then the conceptual ideas are more like the limitations I'm going to impose. So I don't necessarily know what the outcome is, but maybe the limitations of like what sounds am I going to limit myself to might be something I think about in the early stages. Have I considered automating the tempo? Well, yeah, not for a DJ track, but okay, I'm getting some thank yous, and I think we're now way past 9 o'clock, so we should probably wrap this one up. And I got a lot of requests in there for another session, so let's give this some space to breathe and maybe arrange another session here. So I'll leave it there, and thank you all for attending this. I'm glad that the glitches were pretty much limited to the beginning. Next time I think we can do something more fancy with the cameras, hopefully. Make it more, well, probably wasn't needed, but more questions coming in? Traditional music theory. Well, I think I talked about these tracks. The RO's tracks, usually I'm going for the harmonics, the overtones, the one note here and there. So music theory is something that I love and I study, and I hope I can maybe incorporate it on the next album, or at some point go back to something melodic with chords. But up till now, I'm really trying not to do that. All right, I think I will finish the session now. Thank you, everyone. I feel a lot of love coming from this scrolling list of words here. So thanks so much, and I guess see you next time.